At my daughter's celebration, the night she called her new beginning, I stood there with a gift in my hands, trembling, proud, and terrified of embarrassing her. I leaned in to kiss her, and she stepped back like I was something filthy. Then she laughed, and with everyone watching, she said it, "I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you." The room exploded in laughter. Her friends, her husband, the photographers, all laughing. My heart didn't break, it collapsed. Because it wasn't the cruelty of a stranger, it was the voice I once taught to speak. Then she added, louder this time, "You're not fit to be my mother. Stay away from me." The laughter grew crueler, echoing against champagne glasses and marble floors. I smiled, pretending it didn't hurt. Pretending I hadn't spent 28 years building that woman's world from scratch with my bare hands. But inside, something cracked, not from weakness, but from awakening. They thought I would cry. They thought I would run. But that night, when I finally opened my mouth, the room went silent. And within 72 hours, the empire she mocked me with was ash. If you believe no parent deserves humiliation, ever, then like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because tonight's story will show you how silence, when chosen carefully, becomes the loudest revenge. But let me take you back. Let me show you how we got here. Because this wasn't always our story. Once upon a time, I was everything to her. Once upon a time, she loved me. 28 years ago, I held her in my arms in a hospital room with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. Her father had already walked away, said he wasn't ready for the responsibility. Said I could handle it on my own. And God help me, I believed I could. I believed love would be enough. Those early years blur together now, a montage of double shifts and sleepless nights. I worked at the diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then cleaned offices until midnight. I came home smelling like grease and disinfectant, my hands raw from bleach, my feet screaming in shoes I couldn't afford to replace. But I'd tiptoe into her room anyway, just to watch her sleep. Just to remind myself why I was destroying my body piece by piece. I remember the morning she asked why other kids had 2 parents and she only had one. She was maybe 5 years old, sitting at our kitchen table, a folding card table I'd bought at a yard sale for $15. I was pouring generic cereal into a bowl with a chip in the rim, and her question hit me like a physical blow. I knelt down beside her chair and told her the truth, as gently as I could. Some families look different, sweetheart. But you have more love than most kids with 2 parents. You have all of mine. She smiled then, that gap-toothed grin that could light up our tiny apartment. She threw her arms around my neck and said, "That's okay, Mama. You're enough for me." I held her so tight that morning, breathing in the smell of her strawberry shampoo, and I swore I would be enough. I would give her everything I never had. The years that followed were a blur of sacrifice disguised as choice. I wore the same 3 outfits to work, rotating them through our second-hand washing machine that only worked if you kicked it in exactly the right spot. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have real meals, chicken, vegetables, fruit that wasn't bruised or on sale. I learned to cut her hair myself, watching YouTube videos on my cracked phone after she went to bed. I hemmed her clothes when she grew, let them out when she needed more room, patched holes, and called them design features. But I also made sure she had what mattered. Piano lessons with Mrs. Henderson down the hall who charged me in installments. Books, oh God, so many books. Our apartment was tiny, but one entire wall was nothing but shelves I'd built myself, loaded with every story I could afford to give her. I read to her every night until she was old enough to read to me, and even then we'd take turns with the chapters, her voice getting stronger and more confident with every page. When she was 8, she told me she wanted to be a writer. I worked an extra job that Christmas, gift wrapping at the mall until my fingers were paper cut and bleeding, so I could buy her a real typewriter. Not a toy, but an actual vintage Remington I found at an estate sale. She cried when she unwrapped it, and I told her, every great story starts with someone brave enough to put words on paper. You're going to write beautiful things, baby. She did write, all through elementary and middle school. Stories about brave girls who saved the world, about mothers and daughters who went on adventures together, about families that chose each other even when the world told them they weren't enough. I kept every story in a box under my bed. I still have that box. High school changed everything. Not all at once, change is sneaky that way. It starts small, in the spaces between words, in the silences that grow longer each day. She was brilliant, my daughter. Top of her class, president of 3 clubs, scholarship material from the moment she walked into those halls. I was so proud I could have burst. But pride, I learned, can blind you to the cracks forming in your own foundation. The first crack was her name. She'd always been my Emma, Emma Rose, after my grandmother who raised me when my own mother couldn't. But suddenly she was M to her friends, and then Emerson to her teachers. When I called her Emma, she'd wince slightly, like I was mispronouncing something sacred. It's Emerson, Mom. She'd correct me gently at first, then with increasing irritation. Emma sounds so common. Common. Like me, she meant. Like the life I'd given her. She started spending more time at her friends' houses, friends whose parents were doctors and lawyers and business owners. Friends who lived in houses with 2-car garages and kitchens bigger than our entire apartment. She'd come home with stories about their family vacations, their cleaning ladies, their casual mentions of college funds and trust accounts. I watched her eyes change when she looked around our apartment, seeing it suddenly through their eyes. Seeing me through their eyes. I started working overtime to save for her college expenses, even though she had scholarships lined up. I wanted her to have spending money, to not stand out as the poor kid among her wealthy classmates. I picked up weekend shifts at a catering company, serving at the kinds of parties I could never afford to attend. I'd watch the wealthy families interact, the casual elegance, the way they held their wine glasses, the topics they discussed, and I'd try to learn, to absorb whatever I could to help Emma fit in. But the gap was widening, and no amount of overtime could bridge it. She met David during her sophomore year at university. Yale University, full scholarship, thank God, because even with all my saving, I couldn't have afforded those tuition bills. David came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't flash itself around because it doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. His family owned hotels and restaurants, had connections that opened doors before you even knew you were knocking. When she first brought him home for dinner, I cleaned our apartment for 3 days straight. I bought new dishes, still secondhand, but without chips or cracks. I cooked her favorite meal, pot roast with all the vegetables, and I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I saved for job interviews and parent-teacher conferences. I was so nervous I could barely eat, but I was determined to make a good impression. David was polite, perfectly mannered, but I caught him looking around our small space with a kind of anthropological curiosity. Like he was studying how the other half lived. When Emma walked him to the door, I heard him say something about quaint charm, and the way he said it made my stomach clench. Not mean, exactly, but distant. Like he was already cataloging this experience as a story to tell his real friends later. But Emma was glowing. She was in love, and love made her radiant in a way I'd never seen before. When she talked about him, her whole face transformed. She described their dates, art galleries and wine tastings, weekend trips to his family's house in the Hamptons, and I'd smile and nod and pretend my heart wasn't breaking a little more each time. Because I could see where this was heading. I could see her slipping away from me, not out of malice, but out of growth. She was becoming someone new, someone sophisticated and polished and beautiful. Someone who belonged in David's world. And I was proud of her transformation, truly. But I was also terrified of being left behind. The wedding was a fairy tale. David's family paid for everything, of course. The venue was a historic mansion with gardens that looked like something from a movie. Emma wore her grandmother's, David's grandmother's, wedding dress, a vintage creation worth more than I made in 2 years. She looked like a princess, absolutely radiant, and I cried through the entire ceremony. I remember standing in the receiving line afterward, watching her greet David's family and friends. She moved through that crowd like she was born to it, her posture perfect, her smile gracious, her conversation effortless. She'd learned to hold her wine glass properly, to make small talk about art and politics and social causes. She developed opinions about restaurants I'd never heard of, vacation destinations I couldn't pronounce. And when she introduced me to David's relatives, there was something in her voice, a subtle shift, a slight tension. "This is my mother," she'd say, and then quickly change the subject or guide the conversation elsewhere. Not ashamed, exactly, but protective. Protective of her new identity, her place in this golden world she'd married into. I understood. God help me, I understood completely. I just wished it didn't hurt so much. The changes came gradually after the wedding. David's family welcomed her completely. They adored her intelligence, her drive, her grace under pressure. They brought her into the family business, gave her responsibilities and decision-making power. She thrived in that environment, became a force to be reckoned with. She launched charitable initiatives, organized fundraising galas, appeared in society magazines as one of the city's most promising young philanthropists. I was so proud of her success. But with each accomplishment, each photo in the newspaper, each invitation to exclusive events, the distance between us grew. Our phone calls became shorter, less frequent. Her visits home stopped altogether. I was the one who had to make the drive to see her, and even then, our meetings felt scheduled, polite, strained. She bought me a house. A small but lovely place in a decent neighborhood, with a garden and a front porch, and everything I'd ever dreamed of having. "You don't need to work so hard anymore, Mom," she told me when she handed me the keys. "You've done enough. You've earned the right to rest." But rest felt like retirement from her life. The house was beautiful and empty, and I rattled around in it like a ghost haunting her own dreams. I tried to fill my days with gardening and reading and volunteer work, but nothing filled the Emma-shaped hole in my chest. I started noticing other changes too. Her accent had shifted, become more polished, more neutral. She dropped the regional expressions she'd grown up with, the little colloquialisms that marked her as my daughter. Her vocabulary expanded to include words like divine and exquisite and absolutely ghastly. She began correcting me when I used the wrong fork at restaurants or mispronounced the names of expensive wines. "It's not criticism, Mom," she'd say when I flinched at her corrections. "I'm just trying to help you feel more comfortable in these settings." But comfort was the last thing I felt. I felt like an imposter, a fraud, someone playing dress-up in a world where I didn't belong. And the worst part was watching Emma pretend not to notice my discomfort, pretending that my obvious fish-out-of-water panic was somehow charming or endearing. The real breaking point came at David's company's annual gala 3 years ago. Emma had invited me, and I'd spent weeks preparing, bought a new dress, practiced my small talk, researched the charity they were supporting so I'd have something intelligent to contribute to conversations. I wanted so desperately to make her proud, to prove that I could fit into her world if I just tried hard enough. But the night was a disaster from the moment I arrived. I gave my name to the valet wrong, said Emma's mother, instead of giving my own name, marking myself immediately as an outsider. I couldn't figure out which bathroom was which because the signs were in French. I accidentally called David Dennis twice and had to pretend it was a joke. I spilled red wine on my dress during cocktail hour and spent 20 minutes in the bathroom trying to clean it with hand soap and paper towels. And through it all, I watched Emma watching me. Not with embarrassment, exactly, but with a kind of anxious vigilance. Like she was waiting for me to say or do something that would shatter the careful image she'd built. She assigned David's cousin to help me navigate the evening, which was a polite way of saying she'd given me a babysitter. I left early, claiming a headache. Emma walked me to the door, her face tight with concern and something else I couldn't quite name. Are you okay, Mom? You seemed a little overwhelmed tonight. Overwhelmed. Like I was a child who couldn't handle adult situations. Like I was an embarrassment she had to manage. I'm fine, sweetheart, I lied. Just tired. You go back to your party. Have fun. She hugged me goodbye, and I held on a little too long, breathing in her perfume, something expensive and sophisticated that I didn't recognize. She smelled like someone else's daughter. The invitations became less frequent after that. Holiday dinners were moved to restaurants instead of homes, neutral territory where my social missteps would be less noticeable. Our conversations became even more careful, more surface level. She'd ask about my health, my house, my garden. I'd ask about her work, her travels, her charitable projects. We talked around the growing silence between us, both of us pretending not to notice the chasm where our relationship used to be. But I never stopped loving her. I never stopped being proud of her. I never stopped hoping that somehow, someday, we'd find our way back to each other. I kept that box of her childhood stories under my bed, and sometimes late at night, I'd read them and remember the little girl who used to climb into my lap and say, "Tell me about when I was born, Mama. Tell me about how happy you were when you first saw me." I was still that happy. I was still that proud. I just didn't know how to tell her anymore. And then came the invitation to her celebration. Her new beginning, she called it. She was launching a new charitable foundation, something focused on education and opportunity for underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter, who had once been an underprivileged child herself, was now in a position to help others climb the ladder she'd climbed. The invitation was beautiful, embossed and elegant, with my name written in flowing script. But it felt like a test, one last chance to prove I could belong in her world. One last opportunity to be the mother she needed me to be instead of the mother I'd always been. I spent weeks preparing for that party. I had my hair done professionally for the first time in years. I bought a dress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I practiced conversations in the mirror, rehearsed answers to questions I thought people might ask. I wrapped her gift, a photo of the two of us from her college graduation, in a frame that had belonged to my grandmother, with hands that shook from nerves and anticipation. I drove to the venue that night with my heart pounding. The place was spectacular, a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, waiters in white jackets carrying trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than I used to make in a week. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite: politicians, business leaders, celebrities, social media influencers with millions of followers. And there she was, my Emma, holding court in the center of it all. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my car, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless. She was radiant, confident, completely in her element. She belonged there in a way I could never belong anywhere. She had become everything I dreamed she could be. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. She was laughing at something someone had said, her head thrown back, her eyes sparkling. She looked so happy, so secure in her place in the world. And for a moment, my heart swelled with pure maternal pride. This was my daughter. I had raised this incredible woman. Whatever else had happened between us, I had given her the foundation that allowed her to build this life. But then reality crashed back in. The security guard asking to check my invitation again, his eyes skeptical as he compared my face to the name on the list. The way conversations quieted slightly when I passed, people trying to place me, to figure out who I was and why I was there. The awkward moment when someone asked what I did for a living and I had to explain that I was retired, hoping they wouldn't ask what I'd retired from. Emma spotted me across the room and waved, her smile bright and genuine. She excused herself from her conversation and walked over, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. She looked beautiful, radiant, and she was my daughter coming to greet me at her party. Mom, you made it. She kissed the air beside my cheek, careful not to disturb her makeup. You look lovely. How was the drive? We made small talk for a few minutes, the kind of polite conversation we'd perfected over the years. She introduced me to a few people. This is my mother, and I smiled and shook hands and tried to blend into the background. I could see photographers circulating, capturing moments for the society pages, and I found myself stepping out of frame whenever they approached. The party swirled around us, a kaleidoscope of beautiful people having beautiful conversations about beautiful things. I nursed a single glass of champagne and tried to look like I belonged, tried to be invisible enough not to embarrass her but present enough to support her on her special night. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The speeches were over, the toasts had been made, and the crowd had settled into smaller groups for more intimate conversations. I approached Emma carefully, waiting for a lull in her conversation with a group of women who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Emma, honey? I touched her arm gently. I have something for you. She turned to me with a smile that seemed just a fraction too bright, her eyes darting briefly to her companions before focusing on me. Of course, Mom. What is it? I pulled out the wrapped frame, my hands trembling slightly. It's just something small. A memento. From your graduation day, remember? You looked so beautiful and you were so proud. She took the gift with the same polite smile she'd been wearing all evening, but I could see something shifting in her expression. Her friends were watching now, their conversations pausing as they waited to see what would happen next. I could feel the weight of their attention, the way they were cataloging this moment, filing it away as a story to share later. Thank you, Mom. That's very thoughtful. She set the gift aside without unwrapping it, and something in my chest clenched. We can look at it later, okay? But I wanted her to open it. I wanted her to see the photo, to remember that day when she'd thrown her arms around me and told me I was the best mother in the world. I wanted her to remember, just for a moment, when loving me hadn't been complicated or embarrassing or difficult. Could you maybe just peek at it now? It won't take long. Her smile became strained. Mom, we're in the middle of a party. There are photographers here. Can we please do this later? Photographers. Of course. She didn't want to be photographed opening a homemade gift from her working-class mother. She didn't want that image associated with her new foundation, her new beginning. I understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. Of course, I said quietly. I'm sorry. But then, in my nervousness and disappointment, I made the mistake that would haunt me forever. I leaned in to kiss her cheek, not an air kiss like she'd given me, but a real kiss, the kind I used to give her when she was small, and everything between us was simple and pure. She stepped back. Not a big step. Not dramatic or obvious. Just a small movement, a subtle shift away from me. But it might as well have been a chasm. The rejection was so clear, so immediate, that I felt it like a physical blow. And then she laughed. A small, nervous laugh that she probably thought would smooth over the awkwardness. But to me, standing there with my hand still reaching toward her, it sounded like mockery. Mom, you're being a little. She glanced at her friends, and I saw something pass between them. A look. An understanding. You're being a little much right now. The words hit me like a slap. A little much. Like I was an overeager child demanding attention. Like my love was excessive, inappropriate, embarrassing. And then, as if the first humiliation wasn't enough, she said the words that would echo in my head for months afterward. Honestly, I'd rather kiss my dog than kiss you right now. The group erupted in laughter. Not cruel laughter, exactly. They probably thought it was just a funny comment, a bit of social comedy to break the tension. But standing there, holding a gift that suddenly felt pathetic in my hands, wearing a dress that suddenly felt like a costume, I heard that laughter as the soundtrack to my own irrelevance. And then, as if my humiliation wasn't complete, Emma added the words that would change everything between us forever. "You're not fit to be my mother. Stay away from me." The laughter grew louder, more confident. Phones appeared, people recording what they thought was an amusing moment. The photographers stopped pretending not to notice and started snapping pictures. I stood there frozen, my face burning with shame, my heart cracking open in my chest. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I smiled. I smiled like it was all a big joke, like I was in on it, like my daughter's rejection was the funniest thing in the world. I smiled until my face hurt, until the muscles in my cheeks screamed for relief. And then I opened my mouth and said the only thing I could think to say. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart. I should go." The room went quiet. Not silent, there was still music playing, still the buzz of conversation from other parts of the party. But our little corner of the world fell into an uncomfortable hush. Emma's friends looked suddenly uncertain, like they'd witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Even Emma looked surprised, like she'd expected me to fight back or break down or give her some reason to feel justified in her cruelty. But I just stood there, smiling that terrible smile, and repeated myself. "You're absolutely right. I should go." I set her unwrapped gift on the nearest table and walked toward the door. My legs felt like rubber, my vision blurred at the edges, but I kept walking. I heard Emma call my name behind me, heard footsteps that might have been her following me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't turn around. If I turned around, I would shatter into a million pieces right there on her perfect marble floor. I made it to my car before the tears started. I sat in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, and sobbed until I thought I might throw up. 28 years of love, of sacrifice, of building my entire identity around being her mother, all of it dismissed with a casual joke about preferring to kiss a dog. But somewhere in the middle of that breakdown, something else started to grow. Something cold and sharp and quietly furious. Because as I sat there, replaying the scene over and over, I started to remember things. Details. Conversations. Numbers. I remembered how Emma had described her new foundation to me over dinner a month ago. The budget, the donor list, the tax implications. I remembered her mentioning the tax-exempt status, the way she'd laughed about how easy it was to structure things properly when you had the right accountants. I remembered David talking about their various charitable contributions, how they'd structured their giving to maximize their tax benefits. I remembered Emma mentioning offshore accounts, shell companies, complex financial instruments that I didn't fully understand, but that sounded questionable even to my untrained ear. I remembered my years of managing our family finances, balancing books, catching discrepancies that others had missed. I remembered the skills I developed working for the catering company, listening to wealthy families discuss their business deals with the casual assumption that the help wasn't paying attention. And I realized something that made my blood run cold with possibility. I knew things. I knew more about Emma's financial situation than she probably realized. I'd been listening for years, absorbing information, filing away details because that's what mothers do. We pay attention to our children's lives even when they don't want us to. The drive home was a blur of rage and planning. I pulled into my driveway, the driveway of the house Emma had bought me to keep me at a comfortable distance, and sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking. She wanted distance? I'd give her distance. She wanted me to stay away? I'd stay away. But I wouldn't stay quiet. The first thing I did when I got inside was pull out that box of her childhood stories. I read them all again, every single one, remembering the little girl who used to write about brave daughters who saved the world. Then I put the box away and pulled out something else, a filing cabinet I'd kept in my bedroom closet, full of financial documents, tax returns, investment statements. Emma had never officially taken me off her accounts when she got married. I was still listed as a beneficiary, still received copies of statements, still had access to information about her charitable giving and business investments. She'd probably forgotten it had been years since I'd mentioned anything about her finances, years since I'd needed to be involved in her money management. But I hadn't forgotten. And I'd been watching. Because that's what mothers do. Even when our children grow up and move away and marry into lives we can't afford to understand. We watch. We pay attention. We remember. I spent the next 3 days going through every document, every statement, every piece of financial information I could find. I cross-referenced donation amounts with tax deductions. I compared the foundation's stated goals with its actual expenditures. I looked up the business registration for her various charitable entities and traced the flow of money through different accounts. And I found what I was looking for. It started small, discrepancies in donation amounts, receipts that didn't quite match up with bank statements. But the more I dug, the bigger the picture became. Emma's foundation wasn't just a charitable organization. It was a complex network of financial vehicles designed to minimize taxes while maximizing personal benefit. Donations to the foundation were being funneled through offshore accounts before circling back to fund Emma and David's lifestyle. The foundation's board meetings were held at exclusive resorts, with travel expenses that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Administrative costs included payments to companies that David's family owned, creating a closed loop where charitable donations became personal profit. It was all legal, technically. The accountants and lawyers had structured everything carefully, walking right up to the line without crossing it. But it was also morally bankrupt, a perversion of charitable giving that turned good intentions into personal enrichment. And there was one more thing, something that made my blood boil with righteous fury. The foundation's signature program was providing educational scholarships to underprivileged children. Children like Emma had been. Children like I had been. The foundation's marketing materials were full of heartwarming stories about giving kids from poor families the chance to attend elite universities, to break the cycle of poverty, to achieve their dreams despite their circumstances. But when I looked at the actual scholarship recipients, a pattern emerged. Most of them were children of Emma's wealthy friends, kids who would have attended those elite universities anyway, whose families could afford the tuition but were happy to accept a scholarship that reduced their tax burden. The foundation was using the language of social justice to benefit the already privileged while doing almost nothing for the truly disadvantaged. My daughter, my brilliant, beautiful, beloved daughter, had become everything I'd raised her not to be. She was using her privilege to exploit the system that was supposed to help people like us. She was profiting off the pain of families like ours had been. And she was doing it all while treating me like an embarrassment, like a mistake from her past that she needed to manage and contain. The fury that filled me wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold and patient and absolutely lethal. Because I finally understood what Emma had forgotten in her rush to escape her origins. I had raised her. I had taught her everything she knew about persistence and patience and strategic thinking. I had shown her how to work within systems that were stacked against her, how to find leverage in situations where she seemed powerless. She had learned those lessons well. Too well. But she had forgotten who her teacher was. I spent the next week compiling everything I'd found. I organized documents, cross-referenced statements, built a paper trail that any investigator would be able to follow. I researched which regulatory agencies would be interested in the foundation's activities, which journalists specialized in exposing charitable fraud, which whistleblower protections might apply to my situation. And then I reached out to Harold Martinez. Harold was an old friend from my catering days, a retired IRS auditor who'd gone to work for a nonprofit watchdog organization after leaving government service. He specialized in investigating tax-exempt organizations that seemed too good to be true. We'd stayed in touch over the years, exchanging Christmas cards and occasional coffee dates when he was in town. "I have something you might find interesting," I told him when I called. Something about a charitable foundation that doesn't seem to be operating quite the way it claims to be. Harold was intrigued. He'd heard of Emma's foundation. They'd been getting a lot of positive press lately, and their fundraising numbers were impressive. When I explained what I'd found, his interest sharpened into professional focus. "Can you document all of this?" he asked. "I already have," I replied. "Every transaction, every discrepancy, every questionable expense. It's all here." We met at a coffee shop downtown, an anonymous little place where no one would recognize either of us. I handed him a folder thick with photocopied documents, bank statements, tax returns, incorporation papers. He flipped through it all with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades unraveling financial deceptions. "This is good work," he said finally. "Really good work. You've basically done half our investigation for us. What happens next?" I asked. "We verify everything independently, of course. But if this all checks out, and I have a feeling it will, we'll be referring this to the appropriate authorities. The IRS, the State Attorney General's office, maybe the FBI if the money trail crosses state lines." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Satisfaction because I was finally taking action, finally fighting back against the daughter who'd humiliated and dismissed me. Sorrow because I was about to destroy the life I'd spent 28 years helping her build. "How long?" I asked. "These things take time," Harold warned me. "Months, maybe longer. Financial investigations are complex, especially when you're dealing with wealthy people who have good lawyers. But eventually, if the evidence supports it, there will be consequences." Consequences. The word hung in the air between us like a promise and a threat. I drove home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since that terrible night at the party, I felt like I had some measure of control over my situation. Emma thought she could humiliate me and dismiss me and expect me to disappear quietly into the background of her life. She thought wrong. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a strange kind of routine. I tended my garden, read books, volunteered at the local food bank, all the things I'd been doing since she bought me this house and effectively retired me from her life. But underneath the surface normalcy, I was waiting, watching, preparing. I didn't try to contact Emma. I didn't return her phone calls, and there were several, growing increasingly frustrated as I continued to ignore them. I didn't respond to her texts asking if I was okay, if we could talk, if I was angry about what had happened at the party. I simply existed in the silence I'd chosen, letting her wonder what I was thinking, what I was planning, what I might do next. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure myself. The investigation was proceeding. Harold kept me updated on their progress, the additional evidence they were uncovering, the growing list of regulatory violations they were documenting. But I still didn't know how I would feel when it all came crashing down. Would I feel vindicated? Satisfied? Guilty? All I knew was that my silence was driving her crazy. Emma was used to being able to manage me, to predict my reactions, to count on my unconditional love and forgiveness. My sudden absence from her life was apparently more unsettling than she'd expected. 3 weeks after the party, she showed up at my house. I was in the garden when I heard her car in the driveway, that expensive purr of German engineering that announced her arrival like a herald. I didn't look up from my tomato plants, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. I just kept weeding, my hands steady in the soil, my face carefully neutral. "Mom?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "Mom, I know you're upset about the party. I know I hurt your feelings. Can we please talk about this?" I continued weeding. There's something deeply satisfying about pulling unwanted growth from the earth, about clearing space for the plants that belong, about deciding what gets to stay and what has to go. "I'm sorry, okay?" I was stressed, and there were all those people and the photographers. I know that's not an excuse, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean what I said. Still nothing from me. Just the quiet sounds of gardening, the rustle of leaves, the soft pad of soil being disturbed and smoothed back into place. "Mom, please. Look at me. Talk to me. I'm your daughter. That made me pause. I looked up at her then, really looked at her. She was beautifully dressed as always, but there were circles under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there before. She looked tired, worried, almost afraid. Are you? I asked quietly. Are you my daughter? She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What kind of question is that? Of course I'm your daughter. Because 3 weeks ago, you told a room full of people that you'd rather kiss your dog than kiss me. 3 weeks ago, you told me I wasn't fit to be your mother. 3 weeks ago, you told me to stay away from you. I stood up slowly, brushing dirt from my hands. I'm just following your instructions. I was upset. I was overwhelmed. You know how those events make me nervous, and you were being so what, Emma? So loving? So proud? So much like a mother. She flinched at the name Emma, not Emerson. Like I was using profanity. You embarrassed me, she said finally, and at least it was honest. In front of all those people, in front of the photographers, you embarrassed me. I embarrassed you by trying to give you a gift and kiss your cheek. I embarrassed you by loving you publicly. I embarrassed you by existing in your space. It's not that simple. Isn't it? I stepped closer to her, and she instinctively stepped back. Tell me, Emma. What exactly about me embarrasses you? Is it my accent? My clothes? The fact that I worked 3 jobs to put you through school? The fact that I come from nothing and you think that reflects poorly on your new image? Stop it. Or is it deeper than that? Are you embarrassed by the fact that your entire foundation is built on helping children like we used to be, while you've forgotten what it actually means to be one of those children? Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you've built your new life on the backs of people like your old life. I'm talking about the fact that you're profiting off programs designed to help the poor while treating actual poor people, including your own mother, like something to be hidden away. You don't know what you're talking about. But I could see in her eyes that she knew I was right. She knew exactly what I was talking about, and the knowledge terrified her. Don't I? I raised you, Emma. I taught you how to balance a checkbook, how to read financial statements, how to spot discrepancies, and follow money trails. Did you really think I wouldn't notice what you've been doing with that foundation of yours? The color drained completely from her face. Mom, I'm not your mom anymore, remember? You made that very clear. I'm just someone who used to know you. Someone who remembers when you cared about helping people instead of helping yourself to other people's money. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She stood there in my garden, surrounded by the simple beauty of growing things, and for a moment she looked like the little girl she used to be. Scared and small and desperate for her mother's comfort. But I was done comforting her. I was done making excuses for her. I was done pretending that love was enough to bridge the chasm she'd created between us. You should go, I said quietly. You wanted distance. You've got it. She left without another word, and I went back to my gardening. But I could feel something shifting in the air, like the electrical charge that builds before a thunderstorm. The investigation was progressing. Harold had told me they were nearly ready to file their report. And Emma, it seemed, was beginning to suspect that her actions might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. The storm broke 2 weeks later. I was drinking my morning coffee when Harold called. It's starting, he said without preamble. The IRS is opening a formal investigation. The State Attorney General's office is getting involved. It's going to be public soon. How soon? Days. Maybe hours. You should prepare yourself. When this hits the news, it's going to be big. Your daughter's foundation has a high profile, and this kind of scandal, it's going to get attention. I thanked him and hung up the phone. Then I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat in my kitchen, waiting. The first news report appeared online that afternoon. A small item buried in the business section of a financial website, hardly noticeable unless you were looking for it. But by evening, it had spread to the major news outlets. By the next morning, it was front-page news. Charity scandal. Local foundation under investigation for financial improprieties. From rags to riches to ruin. The rise and fall of the Patterson Foundation. Tax haven or tax haven? Questions swirl around high-profile charity. The headlines kept coming, each one more damaging than the last. Investigative reporters picked up the story and ran with it, digging deeper into the foundation's finances, interviewing former employees, tracking the flow of money through various accounts and shell companies. Within days, Emma's perfect life began to unravel. The foundation's board called an emergency meeting and suspended all operations pending the investigation. Major donors demanded refunds. Corporate sponsors canceled their partnerships. The IRS froze the foundation's accounts, and the FBI opened a criminal investigation into possible fraud charges. Emma's picture was suddenly everywhere, not in society magazines celebrating her philanthropy, but in newspapers and on websites documenting her downfall. The same photographers who had captured her humiliating me at that party were now documenting her humiliation on a much larger, much more public stage. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my small house, tending my garden and reading my books while Emma's empire collapsed around her. I felt many things during those weeks: satisfaction, sorrow, guilt, vindication, but the strongest emotion was something I hadn't expected. Relief. Relief that the truth was finally coming out. Relief that Emma's victims, the real charitable organizations that had been undercut by her foundation's duplicitous practices, the genuinely disadvantaged children who had been passed over for scholarships that went to wealthy kids instead, would finally get some measure of justice. Relief that I had found a way to fight back against the daughter who had forgotten where she came from and who had raised her. The personal reckoning came a month after the scandal broke. Emma appeared at my door again, but this time she looked like a different person entirely. Gone was the polished socialite with the perfect hair and designer clothes. In her place stood a woman who looked exhausted, desperate, broken. She'd lost weight, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. "You did this," she said without preamble. "You destroyed my life." I looked at her for a long moment before stepping aside to let her in. She followed me to the kitchen, where I poured 2 cups of coffee with the careful attention I'd once given to preparing her childhood meals. "I didn't destroy your life, Emma. I revealed it." "Same thing," she said bitterly. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, it's all gone. The foundation is finished. David's family wants nothing to do with me. Our marriage is falling apart. I'm facing federal charges. I might go to prison. Are you guilty?" The question hung in the air between us. She stared into her coffee cup, and I could see her wrestling with how to answer. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm guilty. We all are." The lawyers set it up, and we went along with it because it was profitable and we thought we were too smart to get caught. We thought we were helping people while helping ourselves, and that made it okay somehow. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said to me in years. "Why?" I asked. "You had everything. You were successful, wealthy, respected. Why risk it all for a little extra money you didn't even need?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken. "Because I was terrified of losing it. All of it. I grew up poor, Mom. I remember what that felt like. I remember wearing secondhand clothes and eating generic cereal and watching you work yourself to death trying to give me better. And when I finally escaped that life, when I finally had money and security and respect, I became obsessed with never going back." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that reminded me heartbreakingly of the little girl she used to be. The foundation was supposed to be my insurance policy. A way to generate income that couldn't be taken away, that couldn't disappear if David's business failed or the economy crashed or something happened to our investments. I told myself I was being smart, being practical. I told myself I was protecting us. And you told yourself you were helping people. We were helping people. Some people. A few people. Just not as many as we claimed. And not the right people. I reached across the table and took her hand, the same hand I'd held when she was learning to walk, to write, to navigate the complicated world of grown-ups. You were helping yourselves, I said gently. And there's nothing wrong with wanting security, with wanting to protect what you've built. But when you do it by exploiting the very people you claim to be helping, when you profit off programs designed to help children like you used to be, that's not protection. That's betrayal. She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. Not just about the foundation, but about everything. About the way I treated you, about the things I said, about pushing you out of my life, because I was ashamed of where I came from. You were ashamed of me. I was ashamed of myself. I was ashamed of being the kind of person who could forget where she came from. I was ashamed of wanting to distance myself from you, and that shame made me cruel. It made me treat you like the enemy instead of the person who sacrificed everything to give me the life I was so desperate to protect. We sat in silence for a while, holding hands across my kitchen table. Outside, the sun was setting over my small garden, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. It was peaceful in a way that Emma's marble palace could never be. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you face the consequences of your choices. You cooperate with the investigators, you make whatever restitution you can, you serve whatever sentence they give you. And then you rebuild, not your empire, but yourself. Will you visit me? If I go to prison? I squeezed her hand. I'm your mother, Emma. I'll always be your mother, no matter what you said at that party. But I won't pretend that what you did was okay. I won't make excuses for you or try to protect you from the results of your own actions. You're going to have to walk through this fire on your own. She nodded, understanding. I deserve that. Yes, you do. But Emma, yes. When you come out the other side, and you will come out the other side, I'll be here. Not to rebuild your empire, not to help you climb back to the top of a system that's rotten at its core, but to help you remember who you used to be before you forgot where you came from. She left that afternoon, and I didn't see her again before the trial. But she called me the night before her sentencing to tell me she'd pled guilty to all charges, that she was cooperating fully with the investigation, that she was working to make restitution to everyone who'd been harmed by the Foundation's fraudulent activities. I'm probably going to prison for 3 years, she said. Maybe longer. I know. I'm scared, Mom. You should be. But you're stronger than you think. You're my daughter, and I raised you to survive anything. Even this. Especially this. The trial made national news. Emma's fall from grace was complete and public, her humiliation broadcast to millions of people who had once admired her philanthropy and social influence. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, and David divorced her before she even began serving her time. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom where she could see me if she looked. When the judge read the sentence, Emma's knees buckled slightly, but she remained standing. She looked back at me once, and I nodded. A small gesture that said, "You can do this. You will survive this. I believe in you." That was 2 years ago. Emma is halfway through her sentence now, serving her time at a minimum security facility about 3 hours from my house. I drive up to visit her once a month, and we talk on the phone every week. Our conversations are different now, more honest, more real, less careful. She's learning to be Emma again instead of Emerson, and I'm learning to love her without enabling her. She tells me about the books she's reading, the classes she's taking, the women she's met who remind her of who she used to be before she forgot. She tells me about the job she's been assigned in the prison library, helping other inmates get their GEDs and write letters to their families. She tells me she's thinking about becoming a teacher when she gets out, working with at-risk kids who need someone who understands what it means to fall and get back up. I tell her about my garden, about the volunteer work I'm doing with a local literacy program, about the book club I've joined where we discuss novels by authors she introduced me to years ago. I tell her about the scholarship fund I've started with some of the money she'd given me over the years. A real scholarship fund that helps genuinely disadvantaged kids attend college, with no tax benefits for me and no strings attached. We don't talk much about the investigation that brought her down. She knows I was involved, though I've never explicitly told her the extent of my role. Sometimes I catch her looking at me with something that might be awe, might be fear, might be respect. She's finally understanding that the quiet woman who raised her is capable of things she never imagined. But we also don't dwell on the past. We talk about the future, her future, my future, the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of illusion. She'll be released in 3 years, and she'll have nothing, no money, no social connections, no empire to return to. Just her education, her experience, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from losing everything you thought mattered. It will be enough. It will have to be enough. Because in the end, that's what I learned from this whole terrible, necessary experience. Sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to let them fall. Sometimes the only way to teach them the value of what they had is to let them lose it. Sometimes the only way to show them who they really are is to strip away everything they thought they needed to be. I didn't destroy my daughter's life. I revealed it. I showed her and the world what she had become when she forgot where she came from. And in doing so, I gave her the chance to remember who she really was underneath all that polish and pretense. The night she humiliated me at that party, she told me I wasn't fit to be her mother. She was wrong. I was exactly the mother she needed, not the mother who would enable her worst impulses, not the mother who would look the other way while she exploited the very people we used to be, but the mother who would hold her accountable for her choices even when it broke both our hearts. Some people think revenge is about destruction. But sometimes, when you love someone enough, revenge is about revelation. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to see themselves clearly, even if that vision is painful. Sometimes the only way to teach your child the value of integrity is to show them the cost of losing it. Sometimes a mother's love looks like silence that shatters empires. And sometimes, when you've lost everything you thought mattered, you finally discover what actually does. My daughter learned that lesson the hard way. But she learned it. And now, slowly, carefully, we're building something new together. Not an empire this time, but a relationship. Not built on money or status or social position, but on truth and accountability and the kind of love that survives even the worst betrayals. She calls me Mom again now. Not Emerson's mother, not the embarrassing reminder of her humble past, but Mom. The woman who raised her, who taught her, who loved her enough to let her fall, and who will be here to help her stand back up when she's ready. They say blood is thicker than water. But I've learned something deeper than that. Love, real love, the kind that demands the best from people instead of accepting their worst, is stronger than blood. It's stronger than shame. Stronger than pride, stronger than the fear of losing everything you think you need. It's the kind of love that can tear down empires built on lies and build new foundations based on truth. It's the kind of love that knows when to speak and when to stay silent. It's the kind of love that never gives up, even when giving up would be easier. It's the kind of love that says, I see who you really are underneath all the masks you wear. And I will love that person no matter what it costs us both. That's the love I gave my daughter. That's the love that brought her empire crashing down. That's the love that will help her build something better from the ashes. And that's the love that taught me the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is remain silent. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply watch and wait and let the truth reveal itself in its own time. Sometimes a mother's greatest gift to her child is the gift of consequences. Sometimes the deepest love looks like the cruelest betrayal. And sometimes In the space between words unspoken and truths revealed, you find the kind of justice that can only come from someone who loves you enough to let you face the full weight of your choices. My daughter will be free in 3 years. When she is, she'll find me waiting not with the empire she lost, not with the status she craved, not with the security she thought she needed. She'll find me with something much more valuable, the kind of love that survives everything, that sees everything, that forgives everything while still demanding accountability for everything. She'll find me with the truth. And maybe, if we're both very lucky, she'll finally understand that the truth is the only empire worth building. The only foundation that can never be shaken. The only inheritance that really matters. Some words sting, but a mother's silence can ruin dynasties. Which hurt worse, the words or the silence that followed? Comment below and share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of betrayal, justice, and the power of quiet revenge.